Please pray with me. And in this silence, please lift the names of one or more of these who you have heard called. Lift into the light of God's healing love those who are sick, who struggle with questions of life and death, who grieve. Oh God, we come to you this morning overwhelmed. The world around us does not feel welcoming. Life does not feel hopeful. And yet you promise us hope. Place that hope in our hearts. Our hope, O God, is based in your vulnerability. That you came to us not in huge, roaring power, but as a suffering servant, as one who would not break those who are bruised or snuff out those who are weak and flickering. Even as we trust that, O God, we wonder why. Why small children face syndromes and surgeries. Why other children lose fathers. And yet we know that one of our hopes is that you are a place where we can bring all of this. And so that's what we do. We bring it and we lay it at your feet. Sometimes in sadness and numbness and shock, and sometimes in anger. For we know there is nothing that we can bring to you that you cannot handle. And so we come and pray in the name of the one who taught us to pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses. We forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. My heart is breaking this morning. Mike and I had spent some time developing a friendship, and Natalie has been one of the children involved in our after school program. And so the death of her father breaks my heart. It is in moments like this when the Lenten season seems most real to me. When the idea of being able to bring our prayers and our needs and nail them to the cross seems to make sense. And yet there is a part of me that still cries out, why? Why? Why for Natalie? Why for Liam? Why for this child in Boston? At our Ash Wednesday service, we read the famous words from Isaiah 40, comfort my people. Say to her that her warfare is ended and she has received double from the Lord's hand for all her sins. And the first time I read that, I went, wow, isn't that wonderful? And the second time I read it, I said, that ain't fair. Say to her she has received double for her sins? That's like saying to my kid, you know, I grounded you for 6 months when it should only have been 3. Say to her, her warfare is ended. And it raises in my mind that question of I don't understand. The suffering that we face, the suffering that we see, I am sorry, I don't get it. And you can say to me all day long, the Lord has a wonderful plan for your life, and I will say to you, then show me what it is. And God said to Job, you wouldn't understand if I told you. But what God has promised is to intervene. Isaiah's answer to this is in a series of poems that are referred to as the suffering servant. This description has been seen as speaking about Israel itself sometimes, or about the coming Messiah. And sometimes, just to make matters worse, it's been heard to mean us, the church, that we are to be the suffering servant of God. I believe personally that without taking away from any of these interpretations, we can say that all three are correct. Israel was called to be that servant. Jesus took on that task and gave it to you and me. In Isaiah 42, 1 through 4, that task is defined. He will bring forth justice. He won't cry out in the street. A bruised reed he will not break. A dimly burning wick he will not quench. And once again, just to make sure we heard it, it says he will faithfully bring forth justice. and will not grow faint or be crushed until he has established justice in the earth. And in verses 6 through and 7, listen to what God says to that servant. I am the Lord. I have called you. I have taken you by the hand and will keep you. I have given you as a covenant, a promise to the nations. Listen, you're going to hear this again in Luke. To open eyes that are blind, to bring out prisoners from the dungeon, to bring out from prison those who sit in darkness. This is what God says when God says, I have put my Spirit on my servant. God makes these promises to Israel, to Jesus, and to us. I have called you. I will hold your hand. I will keep you. I will make you a promise. Jesus appears to be embracing this job in our reading from the New Testament, which is Matthew 4, 1 through 17. Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted. He fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, and afterwards, and this is an understatement, he was hungry. And the tempter came to him and said, command these stones to become loaves of bread. But Jesus answered, it is written, one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. Then the devil took him to the holy city and placed him on the pinnacle of the temple and said, if you are the Son of God, throw yourself down. For God will bring angels to bear you up so you don't stub your toe. And Jesus said, again it is written, don't put your Lord to the test. Finally, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor, and said to him, I will give you all of this if you will worship me. And Jesus said to him, go away, for it is written, worship the Lord your God, and him only will you serve. I would have made a terrible Messiah. Just so you know. I would have made an awful Messiah. I don't do hungry very well. Those stones would have started to look really good to me. Not only do I not do hungry well, when I am stressed, I eat. I have this deathly fear of looking like the Pillsbury Doughboy in times of stress. And I got to tell you that the crowd size you get when you jump off a building is kind of appealing. All these people are here to watch me. I wouldn't have made a very good Messiah. Lucky for you, God chose somebody else to do the job. And at his temptation, we talked about this at Ash Wednesday. If you weren't here to hear it, tough. At his temptation, Jesus rejected the opportunity to behave like a Roman emperor. The emperors thought they were God, by the way, just so you know. In fact, one of the emperors, Domitius, who we talked about on Wednesday night, told his wife that she was to call him my Lord and my God. Try that when you go home. See how well that goes over. He could get away with that. He had a law that all statues of himself had to be made out of pure gold. And one way to look at the temptations is to think of Jesus saying yes to Isaiah and no to the way the world does things. Instead of using his power for his own well-being, I am hungry, let me make bread, he uses it for others. He says to a cripple, take up your bed and go home. If you can say take up your bed and go home, you can make loaves out of rock. He doesn't, as Isaiah said, stand in the street and cry out, draw a crowd. He is not interested, though crowds gathered around him, he is not interested in having the worship, the adulation, the rock star role. People came to him because of what he did. And finally, when he says, I will not worship you. See, Satan takes him and shows him the whole world and says, you can have all this power if you will just bow down and worship me. You will notice something about powerful rulers. They all build their power on what I want to call othering. They take somebody and make them an other. And you take that other and you blame them for everything. Young fathers with beards, shame on you, Mark. You have just become an other. How many others have you seen created by people who want power, and they want that power by focusing your anger on somebody else? Brothers and sisters, God has no others. There is no one outside that love. God says to us this morning, no matter who you are, what you have done, you are not an other. You are my beloved. Inside this circle is my beloved. Outside this circle are all the others. And guess what? In God's circle, there is nobody outside. But that is painful. It is painful for God, and it is painful for us when we follow Jesus as suffering servants. It will be painful to sit with Natalie this week as she grieves the death of her father. But that is what we are called to do. The cross and the road to the cross were painful for the God who loved and saves us. Many of us have heard the phrase, "There is no crown without a cross." When you listen to that phrase carefully, you realize how painful it is to walk through this world toward the risen Christ. Because it means that the pain of our brothers and sisters becomes our pain. And alone we cannot carry it. But we are told, "I have called you. I will hold your hand. I will keep you. And I will make of you a blessing, a covenant." You are the promise of God to the world around us. And this community is the promise of God to you. Because when Jesus came to be Messiah and chose not to act like a Roman emperor, and in being vulnerable, being a suffering servant, He handed that task to you and me. And we cannot do it alone. This morning, probably more than any morning lately, I need to hear the words again. I must tell Jesus, I must tell Jesus, I cannot bear my burdens alone. I must tell Jesus, I must tell Jesus, Jesus can help me, Jesus alone. And so we come to this table where we are called and our hands are held, where we are kept in love and mercy, where we are fed for the journey from the cross to Easter morning, for the task of being servants to the world. And we are made into a promise of God's love.